Hello. Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about Scrum, which is my primary area of expertise. So we're going to walk through how to use Scrum, but we're going to do it not in a regular way, not like many people on the internet do, like creating a video basically about the basic structure and what Scrum stands for and blah blah blah. We're going to do it in a very applicable way, so hands-on. We're going to consider a an example of implementing Scrum in an actual real life setting. And I've prepared a presentation. I actually prepared it a long time ago when I was working for one of the companies that, in my opinion, needed Scrum to manage the work. And just to give you a little bit of background, the company was working on translations, like drama translations, and creating captions. So like creating basically subtitles for Korean and English drama and translating them into the other language. So from English to Korean and from Korean to English. So at that company, what I did was project management. So I was a project manager and I was suffering a lot, and everyone in the company was suffering a lot because the turnover rate was crazy. There were two colleagues of mine who left within 2 months after they started working, and I myself left after some time, but due to different reasons. Overall, it was difficult to manage the work. It was difficult to find the right balance, and that's why yeah, hi Evgeny, thanks for joining. So yeah, I'm going to start sharing my screen. So before you joined, I already gave a little bit of introduction on the video, on the recording to just yeah, to just post it on YouTube, and yeah, that's why I gave the introduction. Let me just share my screen. Okay, all right. So the introduction was I used to work for a company that that was engaged in doing subtitles and creating like captions for various clients that included like Korean drama and English drama. I'm pretty sure you know that because I talked to you about this. So yeah, that company basically I created like a entire consulting project for them while I was working for them because it was unbearable to see people sometimes leaving work at like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. My manager, she stayed at work for like 2 days. Yeah, she basically like spent the night at the company because she had to deliver, like we had our team had to deliver some projects, and the project management like failed due to different reasons. It wasn't due to like project manager's failure because she was managing the project herself. It's just because like there were unpredictable changes along the way, many changes, and our structure, because it was very waterfall, it was very like check, do, check, recheck kind of style. She had to go back all the way to the first episode to check again. So because of this, like for this reason, I created um a consulting like project for them, and I presented to them. So today we're going to go through that. It's an actual like presentation that I did for my CEO and COO back in the day. And just to give you a little disclaimer, I was like recognized. This project was recognized, and I was like transferred to a different department as a. I was supposed to be appointed operations analyst to enforce that, but after that, I just quit because another company reached out and they offered me much better conditions. So the presentation is called Freelancer Data and Backlog, and it's very hands-on. It's very actual case, actual life scenario, and yeah. So the table of contents goes like this. So we'll start off with quotes with things that I heard at the company that made me think that something is going wrong, and that maybe we could implement Scrum in order to get rid of many problems that people were bringing up. So some of the quotes included, "This freelancer is good and that one is bad." So what it means is we used to work with freelancers, outsourced to freelancers in order to create some of the subtitles. Actually, all of the subtitles were created originally by freelancers. We paid them like by hourly rate or by by episode. We pay them by episode, by minute. So basically, by like how many minutes is included in one episode. That's how we pay them. So people used to say that this freelancer is good, that one is bad, which meant that weren't really utilizing all of our freelancers properly. So we were kind of like, as a team, we were giving preferences to certain freelancers and not giving preference to the other ones, which meant that more than half of our freelancer pool, of our freelancer database, was not utilized properly. So that is highly inefficient, because sometimes, well, I was literally like forced to give some jobs to one freelancer, not the other one, because like, oh, that one is bad, so we have to give it to this one. But then this freelancer is already, because they're good, they're always overloaded with work. They always have a lot of work, and not only from us, from other companies too. And yeah, and that's why like we literally didn't talk to like 80% of the freelancers that we had in the database, without even like trying them once, because we just wanted to rely. Every project was so prioritized, and this is one of the pitfalls of any company, like prioritizing everything in order to complete nothing. Because if you prioritize everything, if everything is so important that every time you have to get the best people working on it, you basically will always have the best people overloaded and burned out, and not getting the orders, not completing the job. So then it prompted me to think that we're doing something wrong here, because freelancers, they should be at least tested. And they were tested by the hiring team, but then after that, we were never using them, because we always were relying on the best ones. The other quote was, "This is too much or little time for that editor or freelancer." So people kind of had this internal, like, inner sense, inner feeling about, okay, this freelancer, nah, that's not enough for this guy, but that freelancer, that's enough for that guy. So that also, hi Janice, thanks for joining. So that also prompted me to think that if there is some inner sense, inner understanding of which freelancers are going to like take which time, then it means that there should be some measurement of work that we're not, that we're missing. So basically back in the day, it was all on project manager. On me and my colleague, my other colleague who was a project manager, to kind of like gauge which freelancer is going to take how much time. But yeah, it wasn't objective, it was highly subjective. So we literally had discussions like, okay, so how much is enough for this freelancer? Oh, this freelancer can do it in 2 weeks, but that one can do it in 1 month. So I thought, well, then there should be some measurement again, and there should be some system, right, to manage them. So the other quote that I wanted to bring up is, "We delivered good or bad quality, fast or slow this time." So people used to say, "We delivered good, but it was slow," or "We delivered bad, but it was fast," and stuff like that. So I thought, well, why don't we have some kind of system that measures like quality and pace? So because if there is a fast and slow, then there is some kind of like middle. There should be some kind of standard. And if the quality is somehow measured, then we should also have some kind of standard, either number of mistakes, or just like the overall quality, or just the vibe, or anything, like something should be measured, right? We didn't really measure things, so that's why objective data became a problem, a point of friction, because we were talking about different things all at once and trying to synchronize when there was nothing to synchronize on. So the next problem was effective time, and what I mean by that is time management, and just, yeah, like effective time that you spend working on something. So the quotes here were, "But I can't do A today. I have to do B." So we had internal, like in-house editors who were checking the job that was done by freelancers, and basically adjusting it, or sometimes even redoing the whole stuff. Freelancer was really bad at doing that. So hi Igor. Just for new joiners, just a background. I'm going to go through the actual use case scenario of Scrum, and how I recommended to implement it at one of the companies that I used to work for. And like, it was recognized by the management, it was recognized by the CEO and the COO, Chief Operation Officer, at that time. So I was appointed to another role to actually implement it, but then I just left because the other company reached out to me and offered better conditions. So yeah, so let's pick up where we left. Yeah, like the in-house editors used to say, but I can't do A today, I have to do B, which meant that they kind of like had some kind of preference or prioritization system in their head that they were not really communicating to other people. And I thought that is going against like the project management, and that's going against like what the people want. So we have to find some optimal balance, some kind of middle ground, to make sure that people want to work on something and work on it and have the freedom to choose what they can do along the way. Because the system back then was project manager basically like is a manager and manages the entire like editor pool, so the team of editors. And I could literally come up to one person and say, okay, today like just drop that, you do this, and drop that, you do that. But that's a lot of micromanagement, that's a lot of like dropping things in the middle. Because again, like when everyone is prioritizing their stuff, and we work for a lot of clients, of course they prioritize their stuff. So for example, like Netflix comes up and says, okay, this is the most important show for you right now to focus on. And then our management goes, okay, this show is the most important one. And imagine like 10 companies doing that at the same time, of course you're going to have chaos ensuing. So the next thing I noticed was this schedule won't work. Let's make a new one. So we were remaking schedules like on the go several times in a row, and that's very notorious. Like that's what project management is notorious for, is for constantly making schedules and like remaking them just because they don't work, they're not visible. So yeah, here I thought that instead of remaking schedules, we have to have some kind of set list, and like let people who are involved in the schedule creation go there freely and remake the schedule as they want, as long as it's not, in conflict with other people. So for example, editors coming up and saying, okay, I don't think you remember that I had to go to dentist or something, and I made an appointment with the HR, so this schedule is not working for me anymore. And because everything was stacked up on, like on top of each other, then I had to remake the entire schedule just because of this like tiny change. And that was a lot of work, there was a lot of additional stress, additional yeah, conversations that didn't need to be had, didn't need to be had. And the next quote, not quotation, sorry, that I heard was, which ones should I do, A or B? Again, from the editors or freelancers, like trying to figure out what they need to prioritize, A or B. And they usually used to come up to me and say it with little passion in their voice, because, okay, Dmitry, which one should I do? I'm like, A or B, because I don't want to work on either of them, but I have to work on one of them. So it creates a lot of like internal subtle tension, because if you give, like, for example, a very tough job, a very heavy documentary, like speech heavy documentary, of course it's much more difficult than giving a drama episode to a person, right? Because speech heavy documentary has a lot of like things that have to be outlined in the subtitles, but the drama is like one line by one line. It's usually has a lot of visuals, a lot of things in between, and people generally just prefer to work on drama because it's more interesting than translated documentary, and it's easier. So it created a lot of unfairness, a lot of like people saying, "Oh, I don't really want to work on that, but I will do it." So the last one from this effective time problem was that the editors didn't update their QC or schedules. What are they working on? So that one came from the management. Usually they used to come up to me and say, okay, they didn't update their like schedules, so we don't know what they're working on. So there was not enough transparency clearly in the way of working, and that's like encapsulates the effective time problem, that we were wasting time on a lot of things that didn't need to be, even discussed in the first place. And the next problem is the notorious micromanagement. So please finish this by today. Oh, I sent a private Slack. Sorry for not updating you. Hey, so what's going on like with that project and blah blah blah. So micromanagement at its finest. I believe I don't need to explain to you what micromanagement is. It's everywhere, and everywhere there is micromanagement, there needs to be some kind of change. So that prompted me to think, okay, I have to do something. I have to take ownership of this, because I'm a project manager. I'm not just, distributing work between people. I have to actually think how we can work so that we don't stay overtime until like 2 a.m. or, the whole night working on something that we really, really don't like. So the problem statement ensuing from this was that we don't spend enough effective time on working on things. We spend time on discussing things, blah blah blah. So it creates overlaps and repeated processes. And then objective data, we didn't know how much, we didn't know when, we didn't know why we are doing some things. And micromanagement, which is difficult scheduling, lack of process, transparency, blah blah blah, everything. That was chaos at the company, and people were leaving, high turnover rates and everything. We couldn't find people just to come to work as an editor, in-house editor, because the company became notorious for having this kind of problems. So it was like, for me as a scrum master, as a project manager, who could do something and maybe stand out, that was wonderful opportunity to do something. And so I just took it. And yeah, here is like a graph of things that I used to explain, like, to the management, how things are not working well, but I don't think we have to go into detail here. And essentially this is like team development stages. From, I don't remember who was the author, but we were in the norming stage continuously. So initially, when you have a new team established, you go through stages like a forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning, which means that if you are continuously stuck in one stage, you are not like adjourning, you're not performing as a team. And the best teams, they are of course continuously in the stage of adjourning. And so we were in the norming stage because we were having like difficulties with agreement and consensus. We were pulling the trolley in different directions, and that's why it didn't move. And then we didn't have clear roles and responsibilities. So to illustrate that, I, as a project manager, all the project managers at the company were supposed to also help the editors to edit the stuff. So we literally went into the system, and we were watching the drama episodes. So we were like helping, we were kind of like in-house editors, but also with project management responsibilities, which was difficult to like combine, just simply because it creates a lot of confusion. The editors come in and they're like, oh, what did you do here? Like, it's not the way we agreed to name this character. And then the project manager just, so I really didn't have like clarity of mind. Okay, sorry, forgot about this. So we had a lot of situations like that. And of course facilitation, yeah, that's another problem. Like, we didn't have anyone to facilitate the meetings. The meetings were chaotic, they were all over the place. People were just like, even the clear like structure, hierarchy was not helping us, because again, like, people doing the job in the field, they are not on the same page with management. So the managers used to say, in the meeting, when I or somebody else brought up like the problems of overworking and not having enough time, not having enough structure, the managers used to say mal donde, like, that's not the way, like, you don't bring it up in front of me, something like that. So clearly there were a lot of problems at the company. So the summary, the questions I brought up to the management were like this. That's a long list of questions, but the most important one is, how can we figure out the improvement points when there are so many factors to consider? So there were so many things to talk about, like the quality of freelancers, the quality of editors, in-house editors, because they were also people. They were not like machines who don't make mistakes. And then we have management problem, because the manager at the time didn't clearly know how the work is done in the field. So she was just pushing a lot of work in hopes of completing it on time. But everyone was, because our rates were so cheap. Every client, from Netflix to all the way down to Coupon Play and other smaller clients, they were all giving us a lot of work. So the company was making some money, like making a lot of money, but at the same time we were like bleeding. We were having people staying overnights, and like in the attempt to complete the job on time. So there were so many things to consider. That's why I wanted to focus on one thing and one thing only, which was introducing Scrum, introducing more agile way of working, so that people, editors, can actually stop leaving. They were the biggest problem. They left the company on a whim, just like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I did overtime like the whole week. I cannot do this anymore. My life is crumbling. My people are, crying, and blah blah blah. And so some editors left after 4 months. Some editors, as I mentioned before, left after 2 months. There were two people, like two editors, who left at the same time after spending 2 months with the company. Yeah. So they were talking about leaving the company after the first month, and then 1 month was just like, the courtesy they gave to the company. And which is kind of like crazy to think that people just coming in, After 2 months, decided no, it's not worth it, even after 1 month. So I wanted to focus both the management and the people in the field on one thing, and that was application of Scrum in real life, like in this company. So in this, in this uncertain like situation where there are three variables or multiple variables, I just wanted to focus on one of them, like either X or Y or Z. We have to focus on something. So that was project management methodology. So the purposes and goals that I wanted to achieve with that like project to implement Scrum and implement a new way of working was to create accountability and ownership of project. So when you have a waterfall, when you have people actually given the job, given the work to other people, there is not enough accountability and ownership for the people who work in the field, because they think, well, I didn't really want to work on it, but if I'm, ordered to work on it, I will do my job. I just don't like it. So editors used to say, but you were the one who offered, like, who ordered me to work on this, even though I was attached to another project initially. So it's natural that it's going to have some, kind of problems in it. So just for the background, when you translate a drama or something or work on like some kind of like subtitle, you have to like stick to the same exact standard. So when you translate somebody like as a, King's Landing, let's say a location like in the Game of Thrones show, if you translate it as King's Landing, you don't translate it any like in any other form. I mean, yeah. So we had to align with a certain like standard for each even episode and the like drama itself, like the show itself. So people used to like when they were switched from one show to another show, they lost a lot of time on actually like checking things, because they were not working on it before, and they were checking things and going again through this list of terms and key names. I believe we called it KNT, key names and terms, I think. Yeah. So they didn't have enough accountability and ownership of the project. They were working, for example, one day one editor could work on one show and another show and blah blah blah. So they, at the end of the project, they didn't have the feeling that they actually did something, that they finished something. They came up to me and saying like, Dimitri, why do I have the feeling that I'm not, working on something from start to finish? I really want to start and finish a drama myself, so that at the end I can tell anyone like I worked on this. And people like the editors were also people, they wanted to actually see the drama, like the show from start to finish. So that was a huge problem. Then improve work satisfaction and recognition, provide an environment for growth, because we didn't have any KPIs, we didn't have any measurement, because we didn't, have objective data. We couldn't have conversations from management standpoint and from the worker standpoint, because whenever any conversation popped up about like, oh, you are not doing a good job, people were like, so why do you say that? What makes you say that? Where is the data? And they were right, because there was no data to prove that they were not doing a good job. It's like, well, we don't gather any data, that's why we can't really say anything. So gathering data is not really a Scrum like exclusive thing, but Scrum does prioritize transparency and what's that called, data driven decision making. So if you don't gather data, then you don't have any data driven decision making, you just make decisions on the whim. Then the other purpose was to provide management with objective data, as I said before, and empirical evidence for making decisions. So both from the worker's perspective and the management perspective, there was some kind of necessity for something to talk about, something other than I don't like the way you translated this, something other than subjective perception of like each other's quality of work. Then also stabilizing the workflow, make it predictable, reduce overwork and burnout. So of course that's one of the main goals, to reduce the overwork and burnout, just to simply stop losing people and stop having them burned out from what they're doing. And the last purpose, but not the least, was to improve the company's image and reliability for both the clients and potential employees in the wake of rapid global expansion. So we were expanding to the Philippines at that time, and also Vietnam, a bunch of other companies in Southeast Asia, and they caught wind of this company not being the best company to work for, because they were all over the place. They were getting a lot of orders from big companies, big shots, but they were not having like the process to actually like deliver on those promises. So those were the purposes and goals to achieve by the end of the the transition from waterfall project management methodology to Scrum. The analysis of the problem that I presented to the management was in this form. Yeah, I won't be going through each one of those things. It's like objective data is has a lot of questions like freelance quality, how much time, are we better than others, blah blah blah. Then micromanagement, of course, has other problems like what if other PM comes in, what if there are overlaps, what if it's not scalable across the board, so people, for example, in Vietnam, they don't know how to work in this way. So we had to kind of create something like an umbrella project management method to teach them how to work according to the company's method. Interference, of course, managers coming up to you and saying, "I don't really yeah, what are you doing?" and blah blah blah. So interference is a huge problem because when you have to context switch like from one job to another job, nobody can like perfectly switch from one job to or from one work to another work in a in a blink of an eye. Then yeah, one person project, it was also a huge problem because as I mentioned before, my manager was staying overnight sometimes because she was the only person who was accountable for the project. There was no sense of shared accountability between editors, between the team, and between the freelancers too. So this is the micromanagement problem and effective time problem. Of course, yeah, has a lot of questions like who did what. We don't know who did what. We don't track things. So sometimes you had literally a episode who an episode that nobody worked on or several people worked on because there was not enough synchronization between each other. And even though the project manager was supposed to assign the work, sometimes editors just between themselves decided, okay, can I work on that and you work on this because you work on that yesterday, I work on this today. So there was part of work that simply could not be managed by project manager alone. So I thought, why not just delegate the decision making to the editors, to the people who actually do the job. And yeah, and Una is the system that we used to to work in, and 96%, that's again related to what I previously talked about. Like, is it done, or is it like 4% that's left? Like, what are the 4% that's left? Because it used to show the progress scale, and people, like, when you drop the drama on like 50%, it might actually be done or might not actually be done too, because if you go into the system, it just registers the last subtitle that you worked on. So there was a lot of like miscommunication in this regard too. So yeah, let's move on to to talk about like our workflow from the stage of getting something from a client to actually initiating the project. So the first stage was like client contacts us and with or without a deadline, and they tell us, okay, can you do that? They ask us, can you do that? And we give them like the feasibility after we check it internally. So for example, um, yeah, Netflix used to come up to and say like we want it done by this date, and other clients might like give you a free timeline anyway. So we check the feasibility internally, and then we decide to take the project or not, and the deadline. But this decision process was actually not there because the management was top down. They were just saying, okay, you have to do this. We have to make money. You have to do this no matter what you say. So it got to a point where project managers were not even involved in the conversation. We were like sitting there, and somebody comes up and says, "You have to do this by this date. Like that's a new project," and we were like, well, like, what's the decision making? Like we are overwhelmed. We cannot do that." But the management didn't care. And then we initiated the project. So these two stages, the checking the feasibility internally and the decision making, they could be improved by Scrum by not only by Scrum, but like generally, they could be improved logically if we implemented the system that I suggested with objective data measurement and stuff like that, to provide a statistical estimate and leverage our data to back up our decisions. So because we didn't have any data, whenever the client came and they were like, "We want to check the feasibility with you. It's just that you don't have anything to provide us with," they were completely right. We were talking in terms of like we feel like we can do this, or like, oh yeah, we promise you, we promise you, we guarantee we can do this. But there was no any kind of like way padding in between. So there was no any decision making in between because we simply didn't have any data to work off of. So yeah, that's why, well, like, we needed to introduce some kind of process, some kind of measurement, some kind of really easy way to gauge whether something can be done in the right time. So learning from Scrum, that's where I introduced Scrum to my managers, to the company leadership, and they were quite, I would say, surprised and confused at the same time, because Scrum is a project management methodology. It's not really a methodology, it's more like a framework. But I like to call it a methodology because it kind of introduces a method, introduces a way of working. Even though in Scrum space, people say it's never a methodology, it's a framework within which you work. But I think different. I think Scrum is quite prescriptive in what it has to do, in what your team has to do. But it's also not prescriptive because Scrum always emphasizes, like, if you do something right, do it this way, but then don't call it Scrum. So if you implement Scrum and then it works, but not in the way that Scrum originally prescribed, then don't call it Scrum. It's not Scrum anymore. It can be working, like, good for you, but it's not Scrum anymore. So Scrum, I said, was remarkable for its ability to respond to changes in scope and hence the name, because Scrum as a name originates from rugby, when a team just has a call out and they decide to move with the ball together to fend off any kind of attacks, and they kind of like just move slowly towards the whatever, like, the line is, like the touchdown line is. I don't really know the rugby terms, but Scrum is originally a rugby term. Like, when you Scrum, it means that you huddle as a team around the ball, around a single goal, and you just move in this direction. Yeah. So I'm sorry. Scrum was created as an alternative to waterfall, which is a traditional approach. So, the traditional approach in our company was to like get the requirements and then start working on them by creating the time, like time captions, and then inside the time captions, the freelancer used to put their like captions, like create the subtitles, and then it came to project manager, and the project manager gave it to the editor, and the editor then finished it and gave it back to the project manager. The project manager used to recheck those subtitles, just like scan over them, like just like yeah, fastly check them, and then give it to the team manager, and then the team leader, the team manager, used to give it to, like, up and up and up. So there was a lot of, like, processes when we simply couldn't go back in time. We simply couldn't reach out to the same freelancer and say, can you redo this? Because many of them were one time thing, like they just did it for the money. They got the money and they were like, okay, like, hit and run. So we could not go back to like the previous stage. Even from the project manager, going back to the editors required to move the entire schedule. So for example, if an editor was feeling unwell and somehow did a really bad job, and then they started, without knowing this, without actually noticing that they made a lot of mistakes, they moved on to something else that the project manager again assigned to them. It was difficult to move the entire schedule to like to squeeze in the rechecking process, like the readjustment of the previously done subtitles. So there was a lot of, like, confusion in the process, because the editors were like, can you just do it for me? Like, I don't have time to do that. And then as a project manager, you're like, that's your job to do that, right? Like, that's your job to do it on the first try. But then you also realize they're just people, like, they're humans too. So yeah, Scrum was an alternative to waterfall, because simply because, like, nobody is perfect, nobody is ideal, and it's really difficult to nail things on the first try, especially when it comes to subjective works. Something like subtitle creation is a very subjective thing, that people just think that this should sound this way, but other persons thinks like, oh, that's weird. If it sounds this way, it's weird. And then in the end, you still, as a watcher, I'm pretty sure you all watch Netflix at some point, you still, as a viewer, you notice that the subtitles are bad quality, right? So you complain about subtitles, but you don't know that it used to be like a process of people continuously complaining about each other's work, and then in the end, you still complain about the subtitles. Yeah. So it's yeah, the Scrum is agile in general, is a uh, like, agile, as I mentioned, is a way of thinking. It's not really a methodology. It's not really a set way of doing things. But Scrum and agile together, they are an alternative to waterfall process. So yeah, and here I just described my area of expertise, so we just skip through that. And what can we learn from Scrum? These are the three pillars of Scrum, and they are transparency, adaptation, and inspection. What do they mean? So Scrum, it's like it relies on those three pillars, but they're just like terms. So transparency is basically knowing what is going on, knowing at any stage of time in the project what is going on exactly. Adaptation is like being ready to change tactical direction. So what it means in our what it means in this concrete example is that if something gets changed, for example, if Netflix, we gave them the preliminary subtitle, like, okay, we're going to go with this, and they say, oh, you should not translate this as that. You should translate this as actually like the other thing. So they do some minor adjustments, and for us, it means revisiting every single episode simply to know whether the adjustments need to be done, which is a lot of work, right? Again, so the problem with this approach is that you basically are not adaptable. You cannot adapt to the changing like pace, the changing things in the project, and that's why Scrum emphasizes adaptation and inspection, basically checking your work as you do it. Like, you have to check your work as you do it, because otherwise you're going to end up with a really bad like result. So yeah, those are the three pillars of Scrum, and those are five values of Scrum: courage, commitment, focus, openness, and respect, which are basically like basic human values, but Scrum emphasizes them over anything else. So if Waterfall emphasizes process, Scrum emphasizes like people working together as people. So I'm not saying that Waterfall is bad. I'm saying that Scrum has a slightly different focus. And yeah, that's what I presented to my management, to just briefly introduce Scrum and what it does. And then Scrum basically, like, I think I like to encapsulate it as a trade-off between self-management and independence, and transparency and accountability. So in Scrum, you basically have self-management and independence along the course of your work. You can do whatever you want every day, but Scrum also introduces this kind of time frames, set meetings, and set structure that you have to align with in order to provide transparency and accountability, so that anyone involved in the process, they can see what you're doing, and then they can call you out on what you're doing too. But it means that other than this timelines, like other than this meetings, for example, daily Scrum, retrospective, blah blah blah, you can do whatever you want as long as you complete the job. Yeah. So, um, Scrum relies on a system that's called the backlog. So, the backlog of things is an organized and prioritized list of tasks. Its key feature is enabling self management. So, when you go into backlog, you see prioritized tasks. So, this is high priority, this is like lower priority, blah, 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 and that this is the lowest priority. And there we have story points is not actually mandatory to have in Scrum, but I think in the original Scrum book, in the original Scrum guide, story points were mentioned as one of the ways in order to measure the job done. They originally come from extreme programming. XP used to use story points a lot to measure what they're doing, but these days there are a lot of other ways to measure the work that you've done, other than using story points. So once you have this prioritized list of tasks, basically the people that actually do the job, they come in and they just pull everything, like in Kanban, they pull everything from the top to their workflow, or they can pull something less prioritized, but generally it's like something off the top is more prioritized. Like, that's the purpose of priority. And yeah, that introduces self-management, because if you just simply, as a worker, as a person who actually does the job, in this case a developer, or in this case a an editor, or in case of software development, a developer, you just know what needs to be done first. You just go in and you see, okay, this needs to be done. I don't think I can do that. And then you go to the second part. Oh, this I can do. Yeah. And nobody's working on this. Yeah. Okay. Let me just pull it into my backlog, into my personal backlog, or maybe in the same board, pull it into the next, stage. Or actually, this is like from Kanban, when you have a board, visual board, and you pull the task across the board. But in Scrum, you just basically like assign yourself to this task and say, okay, I am assigned to this task. I'm going to work on this. And yeah, that's how self management works in Scrum. and the list already has everything that has to be worked on in the order that the PM wants. Like the PM in this case, that's kind of an adaptation of Scrum to the company's realities, that we didn't have Scrum Master. That's why the PM was assigned the job. Usually, this part of the equation would not even be there, because Scrum doesn't really prescribe anyone to, to be assigning work to anyone. It's like a very team based, a very independent environment where people, like developers, originally in Scrum developers, where they want to develop something, like, and they see the list that needs to be developed, and that's, they just do it. But in this realities, I just adapted this, and that's why it's not Scrum anymore. But yeah, adapted Scrum to the realities of the company, and I said, okay, so if the PM wants something to be worked on, they just can prioritize it and put it in the backlog, and the editors just need to pick their tasks off the top, which is true. So I think in this kind of scenario, I kind of like play the devil's advocates. I'm not sure what's the exact expression, but I was adapting to the ways the company works in order to make it more reliable, more relatable for them, in order to make Scrum more relatable for them, which I think is what Scrum Masters should be able to do. Because otherwise they become like very prescriptive. They become like, oh, you don't have to manage, oh, you don't have to give anything to the editors, to the developers. They need to do the work only on their own, and management really doesn't like it. So whenever doing some consulting, personally for me moving forward, I'm going to try to, to adapt it to the way like people are used to work. So this is the system that I made, like a very simple system on how to manage the work. You have some like things that need to be worked on. I blurred the titles because yeah, I'm not sure if that's NDA or not, but yeah, anyway, those are old shows that had some kind of like set deadlines, and I divided each drama, each show into episodes, and like each episode had some kind of priority, like either top or not top. Usually, it was just whatever came first was on the top of the list, in the top of the list, or whatever had the shortest timeline was at the top of the list. So once you divide the work into separate units that can be done by a separate person without interfering with other people's job, like as long as they do a good job, of course. But usually people would have like common sense to not touch each other's job. For example, here, if this person is working on this drama, they usually wouldn't touch each other's like dramas. So people, like editors, would come into this system, and they would just check like assign themselves in the system to a certain episode, and everyone would know that they're working today on this episode. So whenever management was asking for some kind of like status update, they could just go into this table and see what everyone is working on. So this is the essence of Scrum. This is the backlog of things. Even though Scrum is was originally created for software development, I implemented basically the backlog system, at least for subtitle creations, for what's it called, localization projects. So as soon as you complete something, you just check it as done, and it becomes grayed out. So if it's not really done, you just uncheck it, and then basically like redo it again. And here is a ready state. So for example, because in subtitling you have to first create the time codes. You have to first create like the time, the what's it called, the slots on in the system to input your subtitle into. So once that's created, I just used to go to the system and put like at put the ready button, check the ready check mark, and then the editor knew that, oh, they can start the work. So here are like type of work, TC count, blah blah blah. So you can feel free to take the screenshot or something and implement it in your work. But generally it looks something like that. It's a very simple system. So once you have something like ready for some kind of like team to be worked on, then you just mark it as ready, and the teammates go inside and they assign themselves to this work because it's like the most prioritized, and then they work on it, and then they mark it when it's done. So it was a very self-sufficient system that like several editors expressed gratitude for, because they were like, finally I can really control what I'm working on every single day, and not ask you or another person, another project manager, what I have to work on, because it introduces again a lot of like friction. So this is the previous system that was in place before, and the previous system here, it's like it's a mess because it has a lot of different stages, and sometimes you had like some grayed out areas in the middle that were not really done, and somebody just accidentally clicked on them and blah blah blah. So yeah, like I think personally that the top system looks much more intuitive, much more understandable than the one at the bottom. But anyway, that's maybe up to the company, like finally to decide. But I suggested the top one because it introduces clear cut off between the people, but also introduces agility. So if you finish something, but then you think, oh, actually I didn't finish it, I think I have to revisit it, you just uncheck the mark, and then basically you're free to start working on it again. Whereas in this system, you see there are set deadlines for everything. That's the most important part, like the most important difference between the two systems, that you have a fixed deadline for everything, for every stage. And what happened is when this deadline is not kept, for example, all the deadlines after that had to be readjusted because it's a very step-by-step system. So once you have one step not completed in the right time, just like in Gantt charts, you have to move the entire process again to just fit the additional like revisiting or readjustment that you originally didn't plan for. So I thought that was the main difference between the two systems. Like this system, it gets the job done. It just marks the last, like the date when it was done, and not the date that it should be done. So yeah, it's up to you also to decide whether which one is better for you. But generally, Scrum would be more lenient, would be more this system would be more preferable. The system at the top would be more preferable for Scrum teams. So at this stage at the company, what we needed was a work measurement units, editor's daily capacity, and like basically to apply the unit to all the work that needs to be done. So even though we didn't use story points, we had to use some kind of measurement or some kind of like a system like Monte Carlo simulation. But because MCS, Monte Carlo simulation, was not like right for the company at that stage, I again adapted Scrum framework because like for the needs of the company, because original Scrum doesn't prescribe you to use story points or any kind of system. It just says, well, story points are nice, measurement units, so if you want to use it, please use. But you essentially need to measure your work in some kind of way to introduce this introduce objective data into the system. So instead of using story points, because I was thinking that story points are difficult to explain and people would hate using them, I thought we need to introduce some kind of other work measurement units, not hours. Because if you introduce hours, people will start using hours as a means to their goals, like KPI, something like, oh, I worked on something for 24 hours and blah blah blah, or this work will take me 24 hours, and actually they complete it in 12, and then they just have leisure time in the remaining 12 hours without doing any work. And that's not like recommended for the company to have, right? So if you introduce any kind of KPI which is not objective, which is not tied to real life values, then you're going to have a lot of problems. So to come up with this kind of unit, how to measure our work and how to make it objective, I included freelancer quality unit, job difficulty unit, responsible self-management, and accountability in the equation. And in the end, I just wanted to balance the four aspects of work in order to introduce this measurement unit. So what I came up with was a system of basically like a measurement unit that included the freelancer quality unit. Okay, that's kind of a bit difficult to explain. So basically, like what I think is important here to understand is, in this case, when somebody does a job, and if you don't have to redo this job, it's perfect. So the coefficient becomes one. Like the coefficient of additional work to the original work is one. So if a freelancer does makes 100 TCs, which is I think it's time quotes or time whatever, like TC is basically like a caption, a subtitle itself. So if a freelancer makes it 100 TCs, the 100 like captions, they and another person after the freelancer, the in-house editor, does not need to make corrections, then it's 1.0. It's the relation of the job, or the relation of the changed subtitles to the original subtitles, it's 1. Then it means that all the subtitles are were perfect, so it's an ideal case scenario. And 2.0 is the worst, because if you have 2.0, the coefficient is 2. Basically you have to redo the whole thing again. So you have one person, the freelancer doing 100 subtitles, making 100 subtitles, and then you have the in-house editor making another 100 subtitles to just like replacing basically the whole thing. Then it becomes 2.0. So I introduced this kind of like coefficient, and then after this, yeah, what I came up with was um like having this time estimate of a drama episode. Like for example, if a drama episode is 40 minutes, then we multiply it by the PR coefficient, which is PR is the what is it called? Review is the review stage when the editor comes in and rechecks the work, and it has some kind of coefficient, because different coefficients, different drama has different kind of loads in terms of subtitles. So you will see it later. I will show you the exact numbers, but different kinds of like shows, they have different frequencies of speech, and different like loads of information. So this was the coefficient for that. And then the standard I created was 16 subtitles per minute. So the standard like the standard load for a show was about on average 16 subtitles per minute. So yeah, it's just mathematics, you don't have to pay attention to this. But in the end, I introduced a system which was quality check minutes, so QCM. And what it did was to introduce the logic into the system, like how long, one QCM literally stood for how long it takes to second QC, to second quality check 1 minute of a drama that has 12 subtitles per minute. So it sounds difficult, but in practice it was really simple. So you take 12 as the like the standard. I think the 16 originally was a typo. It's supposed to be 12. So the 12 subtitles per minute is the standard. And whenever you have something like which exceeds that, you just divide it by 12. So for example, if you have a real life show which has 24 subtitles per minute, you have to introduce the coefficient of 2, because it's 2 times more work per the same minute. And on editors from editors perspective, they want it to be included, right? They want it to be recognized that they're doing more work than the other person who's working on the drama. So for example, one guy working on a really like we had this project called Chapton-san, and Chapton-san was a yenin. It's a real life show. So because it's a reality show, it has 24 subtitles per minute on average, or like 20. And the other person is working on some kind of like Amanja. Amanja is another drama. It was very slow paced, a lot of internal thinking, a lot of visuals, and that's why it had less than 12. It had like 10 subtitles per minute coming up. And of course, the first guy wants to be recognized for doing twice the job of the second guy, right? So that needs to be somehow reflected. So I came up with this coefficient that if you have more subtitles per minute, you just have to divide it by 12. And then yeah, and one QCM stood for how long it takes to check basically the work of a freelancer who was working on this kind of like drama, which has on average 12 subtitles per minute. And deviations stood for this for this difference in 20 subtitles per minute or 10 subtitles per minute. And the coefficient for PR, I kind of calculated it by talking to editors, and they felt like, yeah, it's kind of like 35% of additional work if you're doing PR stands, yeah, the PR stands for the first review, and QC, quality check, is the second review. So the PR was after the freelancer. So because you are like doing it after the freelancer, you have to introduce additional coefficient, because no freelancers are good, like really ideal at their job, and there is a set coefficient. But sometimes editors are so good at their job that the second editor who rechecks their work doesn't have to do anything. So the coefficient for QC, that's why, was 1.0, because Usually the editor, the second editor who checks the first editor's job, they were like, yeah, it's pretty cool, like, yeah, it's pretty chill, everything's, in order, so it's okay. But after the freelancer, no any freelancer had ideal job, like no any freelancer had done ideal job by that time. So I introduced this additional coefficient just to make sure, again, that people's work is, like taken into consideration. Yeah, well, essentially that's mathematics, that's like the background of things. And like in the end it looked like this. So the QCM system, and yeah, the capacity from taking like one as a basic capacity, it went to really precise things like QCM capacity. You can calculate it for each of the editors. But to be honest, I'll give you a spoiler, I wanted to ditch this system too after that, because firstly, introducing QCM was to kind of like really introduce something that works to the management, but also to basically appease the management. Like when management wants some kind of like system, some kind of capacity system, you have to I had to like go from the original capacity, which was not working, to this kind of capacity, which is kind of working. And then the next stage would be to go to the actual Monte Carlo simulation, which I described in the previous session. If you want, you can visit that one. So, yeah, it was like a transition stage between the actual system that I wanted to use and the system that was in place. So, don't pay too much attention to it, but I wanted to explain it to you to give you a overview of how Scrum Masters actually like introduce change into company. They have to introduce change step by step. And so if you jump from the first system, like from capacity managed like by this number one, into the second system, like the perfect system, like the final system, the Monte Carlo simulation, which is very complex. In the between, you will not have support of the management to actually do that. So QCM was basically like a dust in the eyes, but also a working dust in the eyes, kind of thing, a or like a distraction maneuver, but which works. So that's why I introduced the entire system. Yeah, and the discussion, like pros and cons of introducing Scrum in this kind of environment is like, let's start from cons. It's somewhat complicated calculation, so it's somewhat complicated to do all the QCMs and even Monte Carlo simulation. But the reason why it's a con is because nobody wants to do that. Like nobody in the actual like, companies in startup environments, especially, they don't want to do this complicated calculations. They just want work to be done, and they just want it like simple. But the simplicity comes from actually having something in the background, something in the backend working like in a complex way. Then it becomes simple on the front end, and I think developers will relate to that. So the other con was imposing capacity and quality standards, so which might worsen the atmosphere if used incorrectly. So, for example, if introducing QCMs, people would start literally like to have conversations like, "Hey, I don't think you're doing enough work because your QCMs count dropped," and blah blah blah. But again, it's one of the outcomes of having kind of like a very objective system in place, that you see people who don't do work. You see people who are slacking off. You see people who are doing like way more than they're supposed to do too. So this kind of like a natural outcome of having some kind of system is, you talk about work objectively, and that introduces some kind of friction between people. So it's one of the cons of Scrum, definitely, because if not people, like the accountability becomes like enforced and kept within the team. So at least for on the team level, the team is accountable for producing the result. So the temptation to weaponize the numbers against clients and compare them between workers, that's related to the second point, then requires automatization and commitment to unfold the full potential. Yes, definitely. Like QCM and maintain the system I showed before, it requires commitment and a lot of automatization. A lot of like, this is basically like the move done is a script. So in the backend, I was scripting the whole system. I was trying to make sure that it works in any case scenario, and that took a lot of time. That took a toll on me in terms of actually not being able to manage people like I originally was told to, but trying to make things work in the background automatically. And the last con was becomes it becomes accurate only with consistent, well managed data over several months. So I think this this disadvantage is widespread for Scrum, because Scrum works when you have consistent data. You have to first run the team on Scrum on like faith alone, just because you have to gather some data first and then make decisions based on this data. So yeah, you have to go through several cycles in order to see, okay, this is how we work in numbers. But yeah, usually companies don't have enough time to do that. They don't have enough patience to do that. And in the middle, like people who have to gather the data, they have to be really involved in this. So that's definitely one of the disadvantages of Scrum across the scale. Like it's not only this particular scenario, it's across the scale. Scrum suffers from it continuously. And the pros are numerous. It's like no investment whatsoever. This is the pro basically like for the management again, because Scrum originally, like Scrum doesn't really like require investments, because it's not structure heavy thing. It's just like people can be literally taught, educated on how to do Scrum, how to work according Scrum, and they can do it freely. Like yeah, just project manager becomes a Scrum master, and they stop assigning work to the people. They actually start like working in the background more, making sure that the cogs are oiled up so that they can rotate, and the whole mechanism can work together. And yeah, it doesn't require any investment. The predictable velocity of the team definitely is a velocity here. I don't like to use this term because Scrum is not heavy on velocity, but to introduce it again to the management as a enticing thing, as an enticing methodology, I had to include like predictability, velocity of the team, and blah blah blah. But original Scrum does introduce predictability, because it's again a system that's like it's a system that emphasizes transparency, adaptation, and inspection. As long as you have the three elements, you have the predictability of the process, because you go through the same cycle several like many times. And after that, you basically like you have a feeling, you have a knack, you have an internal feeling how things are going to proceed in the new work too. So yeah, blah blah blah, and transparency of the process, agility in responding to changing priorities or requirements. Those are classic for Scrum. Scrum was made for them. Empirical evidence and objective data to give to the clients. That's also one of the things that Scrum emphasizes again with transparency. Because if we have transparency on the level of, yeah, this is our table, and if you can even share this table, share the backlog with the client will know, okay, this is how you work. This is like whenever we want a status update, we don't have to send an email, we don't have to have a call for that. We just go into the table and we see how much was done. And then it introduces a lot of yeah, of course, transparency, which many companies don't really want. They don't want to be transparent with their clients, because again, they have a lot of their background, dirty stuff, dirty laundry that they don't want to show in the front end to the clients. But if you introduce this system from the start, you can avoid having this dirty laundry, because you just continuously update your client on the way things are. And the client, if they can check each separate work, like piece of work separately, and give you feedback on that, that's wonderful, right? So you don't have the dirty laundry if you introduce it from the beginning. But once you already have the dirty laundry, then it becomes tricky. You don't have to you should not probably like share it with the clients from the beginning. You have to first run it in the backend and then show it to the client as you go. Yeah, KPI, progress indicators. So I think every small company suffers from not having enough KPIs and progress indicators, because people like don't feel like they're following something. And even big companies, for example, even right now at the company I'm working for, I don't have set KPIs as a project manager, especially too. And it's just like, yeah, just get the job done, which of course is good. But when you have something like editors working continuously on very mundane tasks, they want to have some kind of KPIs, to have an ability to talk to, like to follow something first, to follow some kind of like goal, and then talk to the management to like use the KPIs as a means to say, I'm doing a really good job by the KPIs, so I want my salary raised and blah blah blah. So of course it's a advantage, but it's a double-edged sword, because if you introduce the wrong KPIs, for example, like I mentioned before, hours, like hourly rate, then you introduce, like, you shoot yourself in the leg, because hours are going to be boosted, they're going to be inflated, and they're going to be exaggerated beyond measure. Trackability and less time spent on scheduling because it's a self-management system. Like I don't have to manage this system. I don't have to go inside and assign people. They can assign themselves. It's a lot of additional time compared to this system on at the bottom because simply I don't have to assign everything on my own. And then where was that slide? Here. Yeah, self-management and responsibility. Definitely, people liked it. They came up to me and they said personally, "Thank you for introducing the system. I really like it. It introduces a lot of self-management." But there was one older editor. I'm not sure if that's because she was older, or because she was like basically she wanted to know exactly what she needs to work on. But she complained that she didn't have enough what's it called enough focus on work. So I had to, well, in this case it's still like flexible enough to accommodate that. I was like, okay, then you can go. Like I just went instead of her in the system, and I just assigned her to some kind of like episodes that were on the top. So basically I did her part of like self-management for her. Because yeah, there are people like this. Whenever you introduce Scrum, whenever you work by Scrum, there are people who don't want to work by the system, and that's okay. Yeah. So that's encapsulates the pros and cons of Scrum, especially specifically in this scenario. Of course, it's not pure Scrum, but it's like more of an adapted version. But still, like most of those apply to Scrum in the equal fashion. And then I gave some kind of spoilers, which are actually like I was trying to prepare the management for the switch to Monte Carlo simulation, which is the actual way I wanted to measure work. And there was this template for MCS, Monte Carlo simulation, that was built by some really, really, yeah, capable guy. Or yeah, whoever. And what I wanted to do was introduce it beforehand to in order to raise this discussion again. But essentially, using the QCM system, the quality check minutes system, was enough for that time being. Yeah. So here is the outcomes of Scrum. Like naturally, Scrum, if you do it correctly over a long period of time, it introduces trackable workflow, which introduces KPIs, which introduces improvement points, which introduces project retrospective sessions with constructive feedback. Not only project retrospective sessions, but like general retrospective sessions. For example, like if we are lacking on KPIs, we can improve here and there. So if you're not doing a good job, what's going on, man? Like what's going on? Let's talk about this. So you introduce some kind of feedback loop. You introduce a feedback system where people actually can talk about something and they can express their needs, wants, and maybe problems, and talk about, okay, I'm not sure even like I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job because QCMs don't reflect the whole picture, and then we can talk about it. But before you have any kind of system, any kind of measurement, any kind of objective data, you cannot even initiate in this discussion because people have such wildly different perspective. They like whenever we try to initiate discussions, they were like, yeah, exactly are you talking about? Why am I not doing a good job? I'm outputting this, I'm working until 12 p.m. and not going home yeah, before sunset and blah blah blah. And that basically doesn't matter. I don't care when you go home. I care about what kind of work you do as a project manager, and the management also cares about what kind of work you do. We don't care when you go home. If you do the work, that's okay. If you cannot complete the work in time, then that's a problem. We can resolve it. Yeah. But before you introduce some kind of measurement, you cannot have those conversations. Consistent workflow, empirical data, precise estimations. Yes. And that means, in the end, clear, concise, and argumentative discussions with clients regarding deadlines. So, this is the most important point. When you have clear, concise, and argumentative discussions with clients regarding deadlines, that's when you start talking to the clients as an equal. So, for example, there are a lot of SaaS companies, like service as a um, I forgot what it was, like SaaS companies, basically, like and software development company, software as a service, software development companies who run on like providing software to the clients. They basically, I used to work for one of those. They basically create software for the clients. They're like vendors and blah blah blah, outsourcers. And what they do is they just, if they don't introduce some kind of like system like Scrum or any other system, as long as you measure it and as long as you have consistent workflow and data, they just don't have any argumentation about why they didn't finish something or why they cannot finish something. So in the beginning, they're like, most of them are greedy, but also most of them are not equipped basically to make decisions. They're like, yeah, we will take it. Like whatever you throw at us, we will take it. And then when they don't deliver or under deliver, they cannot explain why. And that's the problem with such companies, and that's was the problem with this company too. Like whenever Netflix came up and said, why did you not deliver good quality subtitles by this timeline as we agreed, as you initially agreed, we were like, we don't know, we don't know, our developers just tired, we just tired. Yeah, this is the problem, we just tired, we don't do the work. And that was the huge like problem, and that's a problem of all the startups and all the small companies that are working for other companies as vendors and sub vendors, that they think they can just do this without this complicated big company stuff methodology way. Like you cannot do this. You have to introduce methodology to do this. And then self-management and responsibility lead to more freedom, blah blah blah. In the end, it leads to better productivity, which is a natural outcome of Scrum. If the people like developers who are working in the field can freely like change the way they work, and as long as the the timelines, as long as the quality of work doesn't drop, they can do the work the way they want. Naturally they're going to like this job because they have wonderful like results. They are showing the results, they have the structure, they have the data to support every decision, they have some kind of like some kind of system that introduce either punishment or like endorsement. Then they're going to be more productive at work. And yeah, and in general Scrum leads to improvement over time because Scrum has a built-in mechanism, which is the like project retrospective, or like just general like Scrum retrospective, sprint retrospective. So in original Scrum you have a sprint timeline, but for this specific case I didn't introduce any timeline. I just wanted to go with the basic timeline of 1 week. And what I wanted to introduce in the end was a retrospective session with people talking about how they work right now and what they need to change to work better with each other. And basically, if you follow this retrospective template, like the original like Scrum retrospective, the idea of retrospective of the retrospective meeting itself, you introduce improvement points, you introduce improvement into your system. So those are the main points of Scrum that were like that I wanted to kind of like give outline for the management. And yeah, they really liked those points. So they like, if you want to introduce this into your system, into your working environment culture, or to a client maybe that you're servicing, then using these points is very very enticing for any kind of manager. So the challenges that remained even after supposedly introducing Scrum is the freelancers engagement and management. So if you have the kind of like the immediate Scrum team, you can manage it. It's kind of like self-managing. But outside, if you're using some kind of external like resources like freelancers and the vendors, sub vendors, you cannot manage them as like you do your Scrum team. So this remains a challenge still. And the only way to confidently resolve this challenge is to introduce Scrum to them too. So like introduce them into your system, bring them over, and make them work according to Scrum system too. So this is the only way. Or maybe another way is what's called Nexus, which is Scrum of Scrums. So what you do is you introduce Scrum across the scale. You go out of your way basically to again introduce freelancers into your system, but also make another system for them too. Like yeah, but this requires a lot of commitment. And if you're using vendors or sub vendors, it's basically like you can't really do anything about this. You just have to wait for the final product from them. Yeah. So automatization of the process is a huge challenge for any Scrum team, because Scrum originally doesn't use Kanban board. So Scrum relies, as I mentioned, on the backlog system. It's not really visual. It's not really that visual. So in order to have the backlog system running like here, you have to introduce some kind of like automation. So for example, it becomes overcrowded, you have to introduce some kind of script that basically like cleans it, just like I did here, move done. And yeah, it requires a lot of knowledge about, for example, things like Jira and Trello. because you have to automate them. If you go inside, you have to either automate them or manage them yourself. So it requires some kind of knowledge from Scrum Master or from product owner, from any kind of developer, like in the Scrum team, from anyone to manage the system properly. Because if you just go to Jira and start, slapping the things across the board, you're going to end up with an overloaded board, and it's going to be a mess. So yeah, generally it requires not only automatization of the process, but also your full control and understanding of the process. So if you don't understand how tools and processes work in Scrum, and that's what I mentioned before in Scrum, like you have to understand how things work. You have to understand even Jira and Trello and like Kanban boards and why they are the way they are in order to make this work. So luckily, because I'm a kind of person who likes diving into new stuff, I was able to get a Google Apps script and make it work. So luckily, I was this kind of like Scrum Master who is a bit hands off. But if you don't have a hands on experience as a Scrum Master, it's going to be a little bit tricky. Then consistent data and management, of course, is a remaining challenge for Scrum, because once if you miss even one sprint, especially in the beginning of the process, if you miss gathering data for one sprint only, you have already like lost like 50 to 60% of your predictability, because no, I would say 30 to 50%, depending on the number of the sprints. Because initially, when you start, as I mentioned before, you have to introduce this kind of system, this kind of like cycle that you can measure and use in your measurements, use in your estimations. But if you miss only one of them, or if you fail to gather the right data, then it's going to be difficult for you to introduce the estimation. So you will have to run additional number of sprints in order to make up for the lost information that you didn't gather properly in the previous ones. So this is a challenge. Creating an unperturbed time space for improvements. So yeah, that's where I introduced the Scrum like system, which suggests having retrospective sessions at the end of 1, 2, 3, or 4 week cycles. So this is basically like the sprint, and I explained this concept of sprint as 1, 2, 3, or 4 week cycles, which is entirely correct. So creating an unperturbed time space for improvement is definitely very challenging, especially in the small companies or like startup environment, because people are constantly pulled into every direction, like, oh, you have to do this, oh, instead of this meeting I have to do that, and blah blah blah. And people themselves, like developers themselves, they like to not devote enough time, not dedicate enough time to talking about their problems and talking about how they can improve. Because again, like just generally there is a lot of ego involved in people, especially like professionals who are working on something, and them talking about, oh, I had a difficulty here. There are a lot of things in the back of their minds that run and like hinder them from speaking up freely, because they think, what if I bring this up and my manager is going to make a jump to a conclusion that I'm not a good specialist? Oh, it's going to be problematic. So I'm just going to sit here and not say anything. And yeah, that becomes like very problematic, to just make sure that people can improve and can talk to each other about this. And expansion, that was a problem for this specific company, not for Scrum in general. Expansion, like unifying workflow and working culture. Well, I would say no. Actually, I have to take my words back. It is a problem for Scrum teams in general, because Scrum teams, they are about a small team of people, like up to 10 people is the best. Generally considered like 8 developers and one Scrum master and one product owner is like probably the most okay composition for Scrum teams. Many Scrum masters, many specialists, they actually recommend to shrink it down to 7 people, so only 5 developers, one product owner, and one Scrum master. Yeah, so like expanding any kind of like team beyond that introduces a lot of separate connections between each other. If combinatorics, it's like the more people you introduce into the system, the more nodes you introduce into the system, the more connections, the more lines appear between them. So if you have, let's say, 3 people, it's only 3 lines between them, right? Like 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 1. But if you introduce 4, it's already what? 4 by 3 divided by 2, it's already 6 lines between them. So it's like, yeah, like it it increases progressively. That's why if you try to expand your company and use Scrum, you have to do it carefully, because once you have 20 people, more than 20 people, Scrum stops working efficiently because there are way too many things to take care about. So because we were expanding at that time to the Philippines, to Vietnam, to Thailand, blah blah blah, that was presented a challenge for me as a Scrum Master, for me like as a person who introduces the entire system to actually know how it's going to work. So extrinsic motivation incentives might be detrimental to the editor's productivity. Well, that's, I think it's kind of like, I'm not really sure what I meant by this. I think it's more about, the conversations with the editors according to like their KPIs. It might be detrimental to their productivity and blah blah blah. So don't pay attention to this too much. So essentially, that's it for the main part of the presentation. And now I'm going to like just give you the basic overview of how Scrum works. You have a Scrum Master, you have a product owner. Product owner is the only person to talk to the client, the only person to talk to the client. Maybe with developers, but usually it's like it's okay to talk to the client like just with the product owner. But also, Scrum is not that prescriptive about this. It says, yeah, whenever you have a conversation that needs to involve some other specialist in it, Scrum as an agile methodology prioritizes actually having these results like delivered. So once like you have some kind of breaking point where the result depends on whether a person is present or not, it's better to just include them in the conversation too. So yeah, originally the product owner is the only person to talk to the client or to the team. Like product owner is the one deciding how the product is going to function. So either in construction or localization or software development, product owner is the one who knows how the things should look and should function in the end. So that's the role of product owner. So either as a PO, you either talk to the client and you know what they want exactly, or as a PO who knows how to make some kind of software or how to build some kind of building, you tell the team how they should like what they should present you with. And also you get to manage the backlog. So because as a PO, you know exactly what needs to be done, you have to manage what needs to be done. It's not really a Scrum Master's job to go in there. But in this particular scenario, why I went in there is because I know exactly what the clients want. They want this drama to be translated, right? And subtitled. So because I know this, I can function as a PO, like as a stand-in PO, like forever, and the Scrum Master in the same bottle. But original Scrum Master and product owner, they have different roles. So Scrum Master is the one who controls the process and gathers the data, makes sure that everything is automated enough, makes sure that all the events, they serve their purposes. Scrum Master is the one who knows how Scrum works, basically, and has a bunch of additional skills. Some Scrum Masters even majored in psychology just to provide some psychological like help to the developers when they have tough times. But essentially, it's like just a person who knows how Scrum works exactly, and the developers who do the job. And yeah, so Scrum basically functions as a series of microcycles, but like along the way, Scrum basically looks like this. So you have daily stand-ups, not daily stand-ups, daily scrums. They are called stand-ups in extreme programming, but many people call them stand-ups. They're not really stand-ups. It's just you huddle together for 15 minutes, maybe less than 15 minutes, and just exchange information on how things are going and whether you need some kind of help. Then after this, like at the beginning of the sprint, it's better to have some kind of like sprint planning. So sprint planning session, it's not better. It's like in Scrum, it's pretty much prescribed to have sprint planning session. It's for 1 week sprint, it's 1 hour. For 2 week sprint, it's 2 hours. Blah blah blah. And 3 week sprint, 3 hours. For 4 week sprint, it's 4 hours. Why so? Because you have to you have to, along the way, you have to develop this backlog. You have to know exactly during the sprint planning what you're going to do, at least for this sprint, not only for the next sprint, but like at least for this sprint you have to know what you have to do. And at the sprint planning, we as Scrum team, we decide the sprint goal, what we need to achieve. And then once we decide that, we're basically free to do the job. So it's one meeting in the beginning, one meeting in the end, which is called a sprint retrospective, review, first review. So this is The two are the alpha and omega. So sprint planning is the alpha when you start work and you decide how it's going to how it's going to proceed. You basically talk about, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, you're going to do this, blah blah blah. So let's figure out, and you just have to start. You just have to have like the first backlog to start with after this meeting. So before you have the first backlog of things, don't leave the meeting. You have to maybe you can leave the meeting, but you essentially, like, usually people finish doing finish preparing the backlog in the sprint planning. And sprint review is when you present the actual result to the stakeholders, and either the clients, the stakeholders, or to the team, or to whoever is paying for the whole thing, and or like ordering you to do this. So sprint review, maybe it's within the team. If the team is working on some product internally, they can do the sprint review, like to show whether the product is working and to talk about this. And after the sprint review, usually people would have sprint retrospective. So sprint retrospective, many people misunderstand that, and there was one person in the previous session, they in the comments section that I checked, I discussed, that thought that sprint retrospective is about talking about what was not done, what needs to be done in the sprint, and blah blah blah. No, sprint retrospective is for the people. So people talk about how they work, the way things work between themselves. Like, for example, oh, you sent me this message and it was a bit confusing, so if you could, like, maybe next time, encapsulate it in an email, that would be fine. So it requires a great deal of transparency. It requires a great deal of transparency and trust within the team. That's why teams are advised to be small, because if you have a lot of things, like 20 people talking to each other and getting on each other's nerves, the sprint retrospective is simply not going to work, because people are going to just shit on each other and say, okay, you did this, you did that, and blah blah blah, I don't like this, I don't like that, which is not really okay. Yeah, and yeah, you talk about the way you work, and in between somewhere here, you better have something like backlog refinements. And the timelines are not really strict, but the essential part about backlog refinement is once you have the first backlog, it needs some kind of refinement, right? It needs some kind of adjustment. It needs to be like made sure that everything is, working, like everything is going along the plan, and everything is properly divided into subunits. So, for example, like here, if I just have one big chunk, which is called drama, which is called this kind of drama, and it has episodes from 1 to 5, then I would better, split it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and put it in the backlog in the right order. Or, for example, if something here is not ordered properly, like for example here, it's like September 19, but this is September 30, so September 19 comes first. Then like I would discuss with some teammates who are capable of of this discussion, like whether we should rearrange those items or not. So this is the purpose of backlog refinement. Essentially, backlog refinement in this sprint helps you to conduct the sprint planning in the next sprint, because once you do once you finish all the work here with the current sprint, you will also probably want to refine the backlog for the next sprint, because you kind of have an idea what you need to do in the next sprint. So it's better to like have this time to just work on making sure that the backlog is ordered properly. Yeah. So these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings of Scrum that are prescribed by Scrum. And if you're not doing them, or some kind of like even some kind of thing that serves the same purpose, if you're not doing it, then don't call it Scrum. Like the Scrum specialists, they say, don't call it Scrum. That's not Scrum anymore, and I agree with them. You can do something like this, like I did for this company, which is based off of Scrum, but it's not really Scrum. I cannot call it really Scrum. So that's why I kept separating things, like, oh, this is really for Scrum, this is only for this company, and blah blah blah. So yeah, um what's left is appendix, but here is basically I just talked about how exactly we can proceed with measuring the quality, like the QCM quality check minutes, the unit I came up with, blah blah blah, how we can, yeah, I basically just used it as an appendix so you don't have to pay attention to it. But the interesting part is, once I implemented this like the whole measurement system, the KPIs, then it became clear that this person, for example, is really good. I gave her the legendary tier, because if you plot all her KPIs across the on the plot line, on the, what's that called, like the coordinates plane, whatever, you have the plot line like going downwards. So it means that she improves over time. So she reaches like the coefficient, which is like less than 35% of edits. So the first editor, after they checked her work, they only edited like 30, less than 30% of what she did, which is quite good. And as you can see, by the end of it, it's like less than 20% on average of edits, which is like, which means that she's improving. And this person also is legendary. She went all the way down from like 30% to 20% too. But this person is like not legendary, it's like epic tier, because her or his percentage was 40%, up to 40%, and then it went down but not significantly. So it's like epic tier, but still like worse than these two people. They are legendary tier. And essentially, when I confirmed this information, the managers were like, wow, that's pretty accurate. Like, they are legendary tier, freelancers that do a really good job. And then this person is also epic tier. It's like more than 43%, but they progress quickly from 40% to 20% too. So they, once they get feedback from the editors, like, oh, you have to translate this like this and blah blah blah, then it becomes, then they improve. Yeah. So yeah, now is the time for yeah, here is again like comparison of the number of subtitles. So as you can see, across one drama, it's kind of similar to each other. It's like on average it's like 10.5. So you can see it's not that much different, because you can't have drama change its pace too much, right? So the pacing is kept quite strictly here. It's very good. As you can see here in another drama, it's also very average. It's really close to each other: 14, 16, 15, 15, blah blah blah. Here you have 16 as well. Here you have 18, 20. It's closer to 20. But here, no, here, this is the reality show. It has more than 20 time codes, more than 20 subtitles per minute. And as you can see, again, it's not too different from each other. Like, each episode is not too different from each other. So it means that I was onto something. And it's a pity that I didn't get to implement the system, but well, maybe next time. At least I got to show it today. Yeah. Now, thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for watching this if you're watching on YouTube. And now is the time for questions. Do you have any questions? Okay, then I'll take it as a no and close the session. Thank you very much. Oh, Alisher, yep, please. Alisher? Okay, you want to text it, right? Or was it by mistake? Ah, okay, okay. I didn't allow mics. That's on me. I'm sorry for that. Huh. Um, how do I? Uh, Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not sure how to open the mic for you right now. Can you just text your like? Oh,
Can you hear me?
yeah, yeah. I can hear you.
I actually I don't have any questions. I just wanted to thank you for this presentation. It was very fruitful and informative.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much. Thank you very much for the feedback.
yeah. So
Hope it
keep it up,
works.
and I'm eager to attend more of your lessons.
Okay, thank you.
Because
Next time I'm going to go through Kanban. Yeah,
yeah.
so I'm going to give an overview of Kanban and why it works and how it works. Yeah, so we'll be waiting for you at the same time next Saturday.
All right. Thank you, Dimitri.
Yep. Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
Yeah, you too. Okay, now I think there are no more questions, and thank you very much for coming. I'm going to stop the recording here, and yeah, have some kind of separate session with. I believe Igor, you had questions, right?
Yeah, I did.
No. Okay, okay. I'm gonna stop the recording here.